Greetings on this Friday that we call Good Friday because it's the day on which Jesus accomplished our salvation. Yesterday, on Holy Thursday, in the morning I received an email from my sister in the United States. I'd like you to look at part of that. These are the last lines of the email, and notice how she ends up. An unusual Holy Week, eh? My sister was commenting in the email about all the challenges and difficulties they had experienced as a family. And especially this past week, her husband needed eye surgery. Two of their grown children were suspected of having the coronavirus. And she said, "It just isn't fair. I've tried to be faithful. We pray together as a family, and yet so much bad happens." And then looking at the larger picture of the pandemic that's affecting the whole world, she felt this is really going to be a different Holy Week. Later in the afternoon yesterday, I received an email from a Jewish friend with a meme about the Passover. Passover is a very family-oriented time for the Jewish people. They come together as a family to eat the Passover meal and to celebrate God's deliverance of them and all the Jewish people, leading them to the freedom of the Promised Land. But this year, because of the pandemic, so many families are not able to gather, and so this Passover will be very different. Receiving that email and that meme made me reflect on the experience of Jesus on that first Holy Thursday. He had gathered with his disciples in the upper room to celebrate what we know as the Last Supper. He had taken the bread and wine and given them as his body and blood to the disciples and asked them to do the same. Judas had left to betray Jesus, and then Jesus gave a long, extended discourse instructing his apostles on how they were to act. And then Judas returned with the soldiers, and Jesus was arrested and taken before the Jewish authorities and the Roman authorities and condemned to death. And I suspect that sometime in the middle of the night, Jesus found himself alone in a prison cell. And maybe he was thinking how different that Passover was for him. Throughout his life, he had celebrated the Passover with Mary and Joseph, probably going every year up to Jerusalem for all the celebrations there. But this year, he finds himself in a prison cell, condemned to death, knowing full well what will happen. And he very well might have thought how different this is. My sister had noted in her email that all along she had tried to be faithful, to be a good follower of Jesus, and yet so many bad things were happening. And maybe that's the experience that Jesus had also. He could look back and think of how, as he grew up, he gradually came to the understanding that he was the Messiah and accepted that role. And he went about healing and comforting and curing the sick and raising the dead. But then now here he was in prison. Jesus showed us what it means to experience the human condition, trying to do what is right, trying to be a faithful child of God, and seeing everything go wrong. He experienced that himself. But he also shows us how to continue to be faithful and not to give up. Today, we're very much aware of the presence of evil in our world. Certainly, the fact of the pandemic is around us constantly now. And we're also all aware of the individual tragedies that take part in our life. But we also can remember today that Jesus experienced suffering and death and tragedy, but he remained faithful, and he becomes a model for us. And so today we unite ourselves with the sufferings of Jesus. We recognize that he was always loved by God, and that God saved him and raised him up, and that God will do the same for us.